The night was colder than most in the Arizona desert, the kind of cold that seeped into bones and made even coyotes stay quiet. Hank Turner sat by the hearth in his old ranch house, the firelight flickering across the walls lined with memorabilia of faded photographs, a rusted rifle, a single rocking chair worn smooth from years of solitude. He hadn't had company in almost a decade, not since his last ranch hand rode off toward the Rio Grande and never returned. The silence had become a companion of its own. But that night, just as the fire began to die, he heard a faint, hesitant knocking against the door. At first, he thought it was the wind. The desert was full of strange sounds after sundown. But then it came again, louder, desperate, almost human. Hank rose slowly, his knees aching from years of hard work and harder weather. He reached for his lantern and opened the door and froze. Standing in the ghostly moonlight were 5 women, wrapped into worn blankets, their faces pale beneath layers of dust and exhaustion. One of them, barely able to stand, leaned against the others. Their dark hair clung to their cheeks, their eyes wide with fear. "Please," the oldest one said, her voice trembling but strong enough to cut through the night. "They're coming." Hank blinked. "Who's coming?" he asked, his rough voice scraping the air. "Soldiers," she whispered. "They took our people." We ran. For a moment, Hank didn't move. He'd seen enough of the frontier's cruelty to know what that meant. The cavalry didn't ask questions before firing their rifles. And 5 Apache women showing up at a white man's ranch could only bring trouble. But as his eyes met theirs, especially the youngest, whose face was streaked with tears and blood as something stirred inside him, he remembered another night, long ago, when his wife had begged him not to go chasing a band of raiders into the hills. He'd gone anyway. And when he returned, fever had taken Kira and their little girl. He'd buried them behind the cottonwoods, and after that, the world had gone silent. For years, he'd convinced himself that people brought nothing but pain. But now, staring at those women trembling under the desert moon, Hank felt that silence shatter. "Come in," he said quietly, stepping aside. They hesitated, unsure whether to trust the old man, but the cold and fear left them no choice. One by one, they crossed the threshold. Hank shut the door behind them and led them toward the fire. He saw the relief in their faces as the warmth touched their hands. The youngest began to cry softly, while another woman, who seemed to be her sister, stroked her hair and whispered something in Apache. The eldest woman, the one who had spoken, met Hank's eyes again. There was no weakness in her gaze, only pride and weariness. "You've nothing to fear here," Hank said gruffly, tossing another log into the fire. "You can rest tonight. We'll figure the rest come morning." She nodded, murmuring words of thanks. Hank brought out what food he had left, some dried beans, bread, and jerky, and watched as they ate slowly, politely, though hunger was written all over their faces. He fetched old blankets from the storage chest, the same ones his wife had sewn years ago, and handed them out. When the women laid down on the floor near the fire, he turned to leave. But the eldest spoke again. "Why help us?" she asked softly. Hank paused at the doorway. The firelight caught the deep lines in his face. "Because no one helped my family when they needed it," he said after a moment. "I reckon I can't stand by twice." The woman bowed her head, understanding more than his words revealed. As the hours passed, the wind outside howled across the plains, rattling the windows, but inside the ranch house there was warmth, breath, and something Hank hadn't felt in years: a purpose. He sat quietly by the window, rifle across his lap, watching the dark horizon for any sign of riders. But all he saw was the soft rise of dawn breaking over the desert, casting light upon a world that, for the first time in a long while, didn't feel quite so empty. That night, the old rancher who thought he'd lost everything found himself guarding life again. And somewhere deep in his chest, beneath the years of loneliness, a forgotten ember began to glow once more. When the first rays of dawn stretched across the desert, the Turner Ranch looked almost peaceful. The corral glimmered with dew, and the horses stirred lazily as if unaware of the danger hiding just beyond the horizon. Hank stepped outside with his coffee mug, the steam rising in the crisp morning air. Behind him, the Apache women were slowly waking. He could hear them whispering softly in their native tongue, the cadence of their voices blending with the morning wind. For a brief moment, It felt like life had returned to this lonely rancho, fragile but real. The eldest of the five, who had introduced herself the night before as Tala, came outside to stand beside him. She was tall and proud despite her exhaustion, her long black hair braided and tied with a piece of torn cloth. She thanked him again, her English halting but clear. "You saved us," she said quietly. "We would not have lived the night." Hank sipped his coffee and shrugged. "Didn't do much, just opened a door." But Tala shook her head. "A door means life when you have nowhere to go." Inside the cabin, the younger women tended to their wounds and began cleaning the place out of instinct, sweeping dust from the corners, mending torn curtains, even scrubbing the old table where Hank used to eat alone. It was as if their presence was gently pushing back years of silence and neglect. Hank pretended not to notice, but a faint warmth crept through him all the same. Over breakfast, the woman explained what had happened. Soldiers from Fort Stanton had raided their settlement 3 days earlier, accusing their people of stealing cattle from a nearby rancher. "But the cattle were ours," Tala said, her voice steady but filled with pain. "We raised them." The soldiers didn't care. "They shot the men who stood in their way. We ran." Hank clenched his jaw. He'd seen this before, innocent people paying for someone else's greed. He'd even worked with the army once, long ago, and knew what orders meant out here. Survive first, ask questions never. Looking around the room, at their torn clothes and blistered feet, he realized these women had survived something that would have broken most men. "You can stay here a while," he said finally. "I've got room in the barn and plenty of work that needs doing. But you'll have to keep quiet. The less attention we draw, the better." The women exchanged uncertain glances. "If soldiers come?" one of them asked. "Then I'll deal with it," Hank replied, his tone leaving no room for doubt. The following days unfolded slowly, marked by the rhythm of chores and quiet gratitude. Tala helped Hank repair fences that had long been sagging, her hands quick and sure. 2 of the younger women tended the garden, coaxing life from the dry soil as if guided by memory. The others cooked and washed, humming songs Hank couldn't understand but somehow found comforting. The ranch began to change, not just in appearance, but in spirit. The silence that once haunted every corner was now replaced by laughter, the clatter of dishes, and the murmur of voices at sundown. Still, danger lurked. On the 3rd morning, Hank spotted dust clouds far off on the horizon, riders heading east. He knew it was only a matter of time before someone started asking questions. A white rancher living alone, suddenly seen buying extra food and blankets, would stir suspicion fast. The army didn't take kindly to anyone harboring fugitives, even if those fugitives were innocent. That night, Hank sat outside under the stars with Tala. "You could keep running," he said quietly. "Head toward the mountains. No one will find you there." She looked at him, her eyes shining in the firelight. "We're tired of running," she said. "If they come, we will face them. But not alone this time." Hank stared into the flames, the weight of her words pressing deep into his chest. For the first time in years, someone had chosen to stand with him, not for land, or money, or safety, but for faith. And as the coyotes howled in the distance and the wind whispered across the plains, Hank turned with the man who thought his life was over. It felt something he hadn't in a long, long time, the stirrings of courage reborn.